Hello, I'm Andre Dyson, Supervisor of Studio 270 Digital Media Lab at Gail Borden Public Library. This summer, we will be entering a new territory, the territory of social distance learning. As in the past, we've had our annual digital media summer camp, where we learn about recording audio, photography, video production, music production, and much more. This summer, we still wanted to stay connected to our patrons by providing resources to continue our services online. In this series of tutorials, we will be tackling concepts like the basics of recording audio, the online digital audio workstation, soundtrap.com, audio effects tips, phone video recording, and editing. We will also encourage our media campers to create content and share it via the comments section. We hope you enjoy the content and continue to delve into a great wide world of media with us. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew here at Gail Borden Library. We're broadcasting from Studio 270, which is our teen center. And today we're going to talk about capturing sounds, the fundamentals of recording audio. This is for anybody who's interested in recording a podcast, live streaming, recording music, going out into the environment and recording nature sounds. We're going to cover a lot of that stuff, what you need, what you may already have to get the job done. And we're going to also talk about things like audio interfaces and the software and hardware side of recording a bit. So let's start with microphone types. We've got condenser microphones, dynamic microphones, ribbon microphones, shotgun microphones. There's other types too. These are essentially the four main ones, and really condensers and dynamics are the ones that have the most applications. And if you're not getting into some niche recordings, or if you're not working in a recording environment and recording multi-instrumentalist or filming movies, then you're probably just going to be doing a condenser mic or a dynamic microphone. So we'll talk mostly about those, but we'll also touch on ribbon microphones and shotgun microphones as well. We're going to talk about polar patterns to start off. So there's a few things that you got to understand to know why you might want to pick one microphone over the other. And the polar pattern is definitely a key point, as well as the frequency response, which we'll talk about later. So people ask me a lot, what kind of microphone should I get? What's the best microphone? That really depends on what you want to use it for. The best microphone for recording rap vocals is not going to be the best microphone for recording a bass drum, a kick drum, or maybe recording an electric guitar, or potentially recording a podcast in a high volume room. So you want different microphones for different reasons, different applications, and this is going to give you some background into what you should look for and why. So the polar pattern is the sensitivity to sound in relation to the angle which the sound arrives from. So in other words, how well the microphone picks up sound from different directions. So here I have some pictures of polar patterns. You see the cardioid over there on the left. The front picks up from the front, the supercardioid mostly from the front, a little bit from the back. The bidirectional is also called a figure eight, so we'll touch a little bit more on those. The four main polar patterns are cardioid, supercardioid, omnidirectional, and figure eight. Supercardioid is also called hypercardioid sometimes, they're the same thing. So cardioid, sounds picked up in a semicircle pattern, so just like you saw, it's like a handheld fan. Supercardioid is like a handheld fan that's not fully open, so it's a little bit tighter of a pickup, and then sometimes you might get a little sound coming from the back from a supercardioid, but you shouldn't get much from the back, if any. An omnidirectional microphone picks up sound from all directions. So like your phone, the microphone in the iPhone is an omnidirectional microphone. Omnidirectional is great for picking up everything that's happening in a room. A figure eight is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The sound is captured in a figure eight pattern, so it's mostly picking up things from the front and the back, and not much of anything from the sides. And again, is pictures that show you the polar patterns. So cardioid, as you can see, the front of the mic, it's in that fan shape. The supercardioid's a little tighter. The omnidirectional, you're all the way around, and then the figure eight, as you can see, is picking up in that figure eight pattern. So let's talk about frequency response. The frequency response is how well sound is picked up in any given frequency range. What I mean by frequency range is low, mids, and highs, essentially. So every sound resonates at a different frequency or hertz, kilohertz level. So low tones, bass, kick drums, things like that, as you can see on the chart, they're usually anywhere from 0 to 200 hertz. Mid-range frequencies, a lot of instruments, vocals, they're in that right to 3 to 2000 range typically, and then 2000 and up is considered high frequency. So if you're in your car and you're changing the audio in your car and there's low, mid, maybe it says treb, bass, mids, trebles. The trebles the high, the mids are the mids, and then the bass is the low tones. So what microphone do you want? You want a microphone that has, for one, records in the polar pattern that you're looking for, and then two, another thing that's very important is the frequency response. So this is a chart showing the frequency response of one microphone. I don't know which one, but as you can see, it looks like right around 2,000 and again around 18,000 and in the 10,000 range. Those are where it has its best frequency response. You see it drops off below 20, which doesn't really matter because the human ear doesn't hear below 20 anyway and doesn't hear beyond 20,000. So anything below 20 or above 20,000, you might not want to completely take it out of a recording because it might have some nuance that it adds, but you're not going to audibly be able to perceive it. So this frequency response that we're looking at, this would be a good microphone for somebody who's looking for, it's a fairly flat response, but it really is responsive, it looks like, in the high, mid to high range. So when you're looking for a microphone, you kind of want to understand what frequency range you plan to record. To give you a little background of, if you're looking for vocals, the typical adult male speaking voice, so what I'm speaking in right now, my fundamental frequency range is likely between 85 and 300 hertz, so on the low end, very low end. The typical adult female speaking voice has a fundamental frequency between 200 and 400, so I'm in there. But then keep in mind there's a lot of what's called harmonics and undertones and overtones that come with audio, so depending on what kind of voice you have, a microphone that works for me and that sounds great on me might not sound great on you or somebody else. So when it comes to vocals, it could be often a kind of a guess and check, finding out, recording, looking at an equalizer to see where the sweet points are or the parts of your voice that you think sound great, and then getting a microphone that's good in that frequency response range. For any particular instrument, you would want to look into, okay, what are the prominent frequencies that this instrument produces, and then you would want to get a microphone that has a frequency response that does well in that range. So polar pattern, the direction that the microphone records in, frequency response, essentially how sensitive it is in any given frequency range. We'll get a little less technical as we move on here. So if you're watching this, you probably have access to a phone or a computer, and most smartphones and laptop computers already have built-in microphones. That's actually what I'm recording on right now, is the built-in iMac microphone. I was going to go with the condenser mic, but we'll talk more about condensers later, and I'll tell you why I opted to use just a built-in computer microphone instead of the condenser mic. The microphones on the iPhones, at least, I don't have much experience with an Android, but on my iPhone and what I get out of recording on computers, it's definitely adequate for dialogue and for talking and things like this, podcasting, live streaming, but it doesn't have a large frequency response range, so you're not going to get amazingly full and high quality audio from it. So I wouldn't recommend it as an ideal situation for recording a band or something. Obviously, you could do that as, to get the ideas down. But don't expect to get an amazing sound quality across the spectrum from a computer or a phone mic. They were essentially built with speaking in mind. But you could get obviously good enough. You're hearing me now. I found that the audio that comes from FaceTime and Zoom and apps like that tends to be better than what's on if you just use a phone call. Maybe that's because the demand for streaming and FaceTime is high, where we don't really even use our phones to talk in the traditional sense so much anymore. Just a thought. So you could use your phone to do something like this, to do a podcast, and you should get a pretty decent result out of it. So that's something you could do without an audio interface. If you want to use a condenser mic, if you want to use a ribbon mic, you're going to need some medium to get the audio from microphone and then into your computer. So you would need an audio interface to get the sound in and out of your computer. It's essentially an external sound card. And you can see here on the picture, you could get some with one input, you could get them with two inputs. I've seen them portable interfaces with up to, I think, 6 inputs and 6 outputs. So the audio interface is going to have everything built in that you need to get from microphone to computer. Now, you will also, if you're recording on a computer, need some sort of software. So you could get Audacity, which is a free program that's more compatible with PCs. If you have any Apple product that comes pre-loaded with GarageBand for free, you could step up from that and get Logic. You could get Protools. There's a ton of digital audio workstations that you could use to get from microphone to computer. You could also get a standalone recording setup if you don't want to use a computer, and you could do it all analog like they did back in the day. So we talked about audio interfaces. I'm going to move on to microphones. So condenser mics are one of the more popular microphones, along with dynamics. Pretty much all musical, I won't say all, but most musical recordings you hear, at least one or more of the instruments or the voice was probably recorded with a condenser microphone. So they look oftentimes like this, but they could take on a variety of forms. I have a USB microphone here, so if you don't have an audio interface, you could buy a USB microphone, and it connects right through the USB port into your computer, and this essentially has the audio interface built into it. So you could go, without getting all the extra equipment, you could get a condenser mic and plug it in through USB and record that way. The reason I opted not to use the condenser mic today is because I'm in a room with other co-workers, and I'm in a shared space. I don't know who's going to be coming in and out, and these condenser mics tend to pick up everything that's going on in the room. So I wanted to get something that was going to be hopefully not pick up the room noise so much. So that's why I opted to just go with the computer mic. Let's talk a little bit more about why you would use a condenser mic. As far as the polar pattern, condenser mics could be cardioid, supercardioid, omnidirectional, figure 8, and some actually have a switch to where you could make it figure 8 one time, cardioid another time, omnidirectional, so you could switch the polar pattern of it depending on the application. That's a great feature if you record a variety of instruments or if you record in a variety of different settings. Condenser mics are built to pick up detail and to capture the accurate sound. So it's built to have a pretty flat frequency response. So it's supposed to give you an accurate representation of how the thing actually sounds. The condenser mics are very unforgiving. It's going to give you very close to, depending on the quality of the microphone that you get, very close to the sound that's actually occurring. So whereas other microphones might take away some frequencies that in some cases make you sound better because maybe you don't sound so great in that tone, or maybe your instrument doesn't sound great in that frequency range. A condenser mic's not going to hide any of those flaws. It's going to be very accurate of the audio that you're putting into it. So that's great for a variety of reasons, but it could also sometimes it's tough to hear it and hear your own voice, if that makes sense. So just be aware of that. You're not going to have anything cleaned up with a condenser mic, but you're going to get the best, most accurate representation of the actual sound. The way they work, there's a diaphragm inside of it that vibrates against the back plate based on how much velocity is coming in. So there's large diaphragm condenser mics, and those are good for vocals, capturing room sound at a reasonable distance from a guitar or a bass cab. And then there's small diaphragm condenser mics. Those are better for quieter instruments, acoustic instruments, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, a quiet recording space is definitely necessary for a condenser mic because they pick up everything. So if you're sitting in a room and you're shuffling your feet on the floor, it's going to pick it up. If your friend's rubbing his hands together in the background, it's going to get picked up. I never realized that I shuffled my feet a lot when I record until I got into an environment where I was recording and I had vinyl floors, and all the vinyl floor was picking up into the audio recording. So again, it picks up everything around, and it picks it up pretty accurately. And again, you could get a USB powered microphone. The one we have here is Samsung, and you could bypass an audio interface. We're going to talk about dynamic mics, handheld mics. Here's one right here. It actually shows you the frequency response right on the box there, right here. So these are the most common microphone because of the all-around performance. So this is good for a variety of applications. It's very rugged. It could be, not all, some are built better than others, but I have a SM50, Shure SM58, for example. That's one of the pretty much the industry standard dynamic microphone. You'll see them at most music venues. They get dropped around, and they could take a beating and they could last a long time. They could also take high pressure sound levels. So for like a kick drum, you wouldn't always want to use something like a condenser microphone on a kick drum because you might blow the mic by putting too much amplitude into it. So these are a good safe bet for very high volume situations or where a lot of sound pressure is coming in at one point. Virtually all dynamic microphones have the cardioid polar pattern. So let me pull it out here. So they're picking up from the tip of the microphone and then in that fan shape outward. So if you're speaking into it, you're going to have a good sound coming out. If you're speaking to the side of it, you're not going to get much out of it. You got to speak directly into these microphones, and they're going to pick up the sound that's coming right around the top of the microphone, not on the sides of it. They have typically less of a frequency response than condenser mics, so that could be, like I mentioned before, more forgiving, but it's also not quite as accurate to the sound. That could be good though for some applications. Like I said, certain voices or instruments might sound better with some of those frequencies taken out. Sometimes not. These microphones are generally not going to be as good as a condenser mic for higher frequency instruments with a lot of high harmonics to them too, so like violins, trumpets, but they're great for live concerts, any speaking engagements, recording a variety of instruments. So this is a dynamic is a good all-purpose mic, and then it's definitely the microphone you would want to use for a live performance in a bar or in any noisy environment where the room is not a controlled sound where you don't know what's going to occur. Ribbon microphones. So these are probably not something you're going to use unless you're getting into a little bit more advanced recording techniques. If you're recording bands, instruments, if you're in recording, a legitimate recording studio environment, you may be using these. But for the, I guess, standard person who's just trying to get into audio, whether you're doing podcasting, music, live streaming, you're probably not going to use a ribbon mic because they have a pretty specific application. So they're as sensitive as a condenser mic, but they give a different character to the sound. They tend to be a little bit darker in sound, and that's because they're more affected by the low frequencies than they are at the high frequencies. They're also very delicate, so you definitely wouldn't want to put a ribbon mic like on a kick drum, for example. Um, give you some context, ribbon microphones, the ribbon that's inside the microphone, that's what it gets its name from, that conducts the sound from the diaphragm, anywhere from zero point 0.6 to 4 microns thick. And to give you context of that, the human hair is 100 microns thick. So this little thin hair, and it's way thinner than that hair even. So they're very sensitive. You shouldn't really use them for loud sounds because you could blow them very easily. Why would you use it? It picks up details in close sources without being oversensitive to the room noise like a condenser. So like I said, if you have a condenser microphone on, you're going to hear the rubbing of the hands, you're going to hear the feet shuffling, you're going to hear everything in detail. Where the ribbon mic, you're going to hear more of what's close to the microphone and directly going into the points where it picks up sound from. You'll hear those it picks those up in a very sensitive manner, but it doesn't pick up the room noise so much. Ribbon mics are in a figure 8 polar pattern. Like we talked about before, they're picking up from the front and the back. There's active and passive ribbon mics. So in the past, you wouldn't want to use a ribbon mic on an electric guitar or anything because they're too fragile. The newer ones tend to be able to withstand a little bit more. They're active. They have some onboard electronics in there. Whereas the older ones don't have onboard electronics and they require a preamp, an audio interface. The preamp on those older, the non-active models, is very important, and that kind of dictates the sound of a ribbon mic. The ribbon mics are more dependent on what you plug them into than a lot of the other microphones are. So if I have a ribbon microphone and I have a cheap preamp, which preamps are built into audio interfaces, but without getting too much into it, it's what I guess amplifies the signal when sending it to the next source. So if I have a preamp that has a lot of noise interference and it's probably not going to sound great with the ribbon mic. But if I have a great preamp, I might get an excellent sound out of the ribbon mic. It's great for brass and woodwind instruments, strings, as an overhead mic for drums. But again, make sure you're significantly overhead if you're going to use it for that application. And using two ribbons together in the figure 8 pattern is a great way to capture stereo sounds. Those figure 8 patterns can capture from both. It's called I'm blanking on what the arrangement's called, but essentially you put one figure 8 going this way and another one going this way. We don't have a ribbon mic here that I could show you, but if you are using a ribbon mic, you likely know about some of this stuff anyway. If you have more questions, though, feel free to send me an email. I'll have my email at the end. We're now going to talk about shotgun mics. We're getting towards the end here. So shotgun mics are typically super cardioid. Focuses directly on the sound source in front, so from right here, and picks up very little from the sides and the back, if any. Here's without the pop filter on here. These are the microphones that you often see like on a television news camera. You might see it at the podium. These are great for dialogue scenes. If you're filming a movie, they're good for giving interviews on camera, and they're used during speeches, lectures, conferences, so that the speaker won't have to hold the microphone or have anything wired to the body. You can just stand at a distance, and as long as you're not moving out of where the polar response picks up, then you're going to get a great sound without having to hold a microphone or have have something tied to you. And on the bottom here is an example of the typical polar pattern of a shotgun mic. Well, that's another specialty mic. Again, the more all-purpose microphones are going to be the dynamic and the condenser, especially for the studio use here. Field recorders. This is a portable device, so you don't need to plug this into anything else. A field recorder is good for going out and capturing nature sounds, birds chirping, water. My band, actually, the guitarist in my band bought one of these recently that has 6 inputs. I think they actually use shotgun microphones on that, and we use that to record our live shows as well. So you could get a feed coming out from the soundboard, and then have the field recorder up in the middle of the room, and you're going to capture all the room noise. And depending on the field recorder you get, you could actually capture some really good audio just off of a little portable device like this. So field recordings is a good option for people who want to record live music, whether it's yourself or somebody else. If you want to record street musicians, the sounds from them, things like that. If you want to record sounds of nature. But if you are going up to record musicians or live shows, you should get permission for that if you want to use it for any sort of commercial reasoning. So, field recorders. And that gets us to the end of our capturing audio webinar here. I appreciate you all watching. We are now roughly 3 months into the shutdown order once this comes out, so hope you all are staying safe, taking care of each other. If you got any questions or feedback, go ahead and email amore@gailborden.info, as you can see on the slide. I don't like feedback coming from microphones, but I love feedback on my webinars. So I'll leave you with the corny joke. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you at Gail Borden Library very soon.